Welcome back to Complete Conversations with your one and only Complete Restoration. We're diving into real stories, expert insights, and everything that you need to know about protecting homes, businesses, and communities. Whether it's fire, water, mold, or just the unexpected, your mess is our mission at Complete Restoration. So join us as we share tips, experiences, and the heart behind why we do what we do. Let's talk restoration, resilience, and everything in between. So I'll pass it over and let's dive in.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into something that's, well, literally in the walls of our buildings, but maybe not always top of mind. Insulation.
Right. It's about more than just comfort, isn't it? It's huge for energy use, saving money, and honestly, the overall health of the building itself.
Exactly. And our mission today, our deep dive, is to explore why quality insulation matters so much.
And crucially, what goes wrong when it gets compromised. We're focusing particularly on moisture, how it gets in, the damage it does, and importantly, how proper restoration can make things right.
We've looked at some research, but also drawn on, real-world experience from restoration professionals.
Mm-hmm. The people who see the consequences firsthand.
So have you ever wondered why your energy bills seem to go up and down without rhyme or reason? Or maybe you've seen a water leak and thought, just a surface stain.
Well, this deep dive might just uncover some hidden truths there. It's all about insulation's impact.
Okay, let's start with the basics then.
Yeah.
Insulation's main job.
Fundamentally, it's about regulating temperature. It's a barrier slowing down heat transfer.
So keeping the heat in when it's cold.
And keeping it out when it's hot. Yeah. Which means, obviously, your heating and cooling systems don't have to work quite so hard. Saves energy, saves money.
But you mentioned it protects the building, too.
It does. By moderating those temperature swings inside walls and roofs, it reduces stress on the actual structure.
Right. And we measure how well it does this job with the R value, don't we?
That's the one. R value. Think of it as thermal resistance, how well it resists heat flow. Higher R value, better insulation.
Simple enough. But here's the catch, right? That number on the packaging.
Ah, yes. That R value assumes perfect conditions. Dry conditions. Ideal laboratory settings, really.
Which, let's be honest, is rarely the reality inside a wall or an attic.
Almost never. And that's where moisture becomes such a major problem. It's like insulation's kryptonite.
So how does it get in? Leaky roof? Bad plumbing?
All of the above. Roof leaks, yes, plumbing problems, flooding obviously, but even just condensation buildup over time. It finds its way in.
Okay, so the water's in. What does it actually do to the insulation? How does it ruin that R value?
Well, think about how most common insulation, like fiberglass, works. It's full of tiny air pockets.
It's like trapped air.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
air is a really poor conductor of heat, which is why it works so well. But when water gets in, it fills up those pockets. It displaces the air.
Ah, okay. And water conducts heat much better than air does.
Much, much better. So suddenly, instead of a barrier made of air pockets, you've got pathways filled with water. Heat can just travel right through. The insulation's effectiveness just plummets.
So it's fundamentally undermining the very principle it works on.
Precisely. And, research really bears this out. There was a study, Zhao, Guo, and Gao. In 2020, they looked at mineral wool and found a huge drop in thermal resistance once it got wet. And it's not just mineral wool. Even a little bit of moisture in fiberglass drastically cuts its R value. It's like punching holes in its thermal shield.
Wow. So even what seems like a small amount of dampness can have a really big impact on performance.
A massive impact. And that leads directly to higher energy bills, of course. Your HVAC system is working overtime, trying to compensate.
More wear and tear on the system too, I imagine.
Absolutely. And the insidious part is this is often happening completely out of sight. Behind the drywall, up in the attic, silently costing you money.
But it's not just about energy costs, is it? You mentioned other consequences.
No, it definitely goes beyond that. Once you have persistent moisture trapped in there, you're creating conditions for mold.
Right, the big one. Everyone worries about mold.
And for good reason. See, when the insulation isn't doing its job properly, the surfaces around it, drywall, wood framing, can get colder.
Yeah.
And if the air in that cavity is humid, which it often can be, that moisture in the air can condense on those cold surfaces. It hits the dew point.
So you get liquid water forming inside the wall.
Exactly. Research has shown this, Zhu, Zheng, and Li, in 2018, how wet insulation completely changes the environment inside the wall, creating these damp zones.
Perfect breeding grounds for mold.
perfect, and it doesn't take long. Other studies, like one by Settlebauer, Kruse, and Zillig, found mold can start growing in just a few days if the humidity and temperature are right.
The days.
Yeah, and materials like, the paper facing on drywall or cellulose insulation, even wood studs, they're all susceptible. So that minor leak suddenly becomes a potential hidden mold factory.
Affecting air quality, potentially health.
Definitely affecting indoor air quality.
Right.
And if that moisture sits there long enough against wood framing or sheathing,
Structural damage.
it can lead to rot and structural decay over time. Yes, it's a slow process, often hidden, but very serious. The World Health Organization even pointed out years ago that mold problems often start in these hidden, damp areas.
Which makes just drying the surface seem pretty inadequate.
It often is. You might dry the visible part, but the moisture can stay trapped deep inside the insulation, inside the wall cavity, continuing to cause problems.
And this is where restoration professionals come in, I guess? They see this hidden stuff all the time?
They really do. You talk to people with years in restoration, and they'll tell you story after story of finding major energy waste or serious mold issues that all traced back to an earlier water event where the insulation wasn't properly addressed.
So their perspective is probably quite different from just, say, drying out a wet carpet.
Absolutely. From their experience, any insulation that's gotten wet should basically be treated as compromised. Assume it's damaged until you can prove otherwise.
Because the risk of leaving that moisture in there is too high.
Exactly. The risk of ongoing issues, mold, continued energy loss, even eventual structural problems is significant. What looks like a small issue can escalate into a huge remediation project later if it's not handled right the first time.
So from that restoration viewpoint, what's the bottom line? If insulation gets wet, what needs to happen?
Well, seeing wet insulation is like a big red flag. It signals potential future trouble.
Mold, costs, damage.
All of it. So the strong recommendation based on preventing those long-term headaches is pretty clear. Insulation affected by water needs to go. It needs to be removed and replaced.
Not just dried out.
Not reliably, no.
Yeah.
Replacement is the surest way to guarantee that the cavity can be dried properly, that you eliminate the food source for mold, and that you restore the building's energy efficiency and structural integrity. Basically, you treat wet insulation as non-functional. It failed its job.
Makes sense. You need to make it right properly.
You have to for the long-term health of the building and the people in it.
Okay, so let's pull this all together.
Correct.
Quality insulation is vital. We need it for efficiency, for comfort, for protecting the building itself.
Absolutely critical. But its performance hinges entirely on staying dry.
And moisture is its number one enemy. Gets in, kills the R value, leads to higher bills.
Creates risks for mold growth, potential health issues, and even structural damage down the line. It's a chain reaction.
So the takeaway seems to be, don't underestimate water intrusion, even if it looks minor. And when it happens, proper restoration, which usually means replacing that wet insulation, is key.
It really is. Compromised insulation isn't just a small energy leak. It's a potential pathway to much bigger problems affecting your health, your finances, and the building itself.
Which leads us to a final thought for you listening. Think about the hidden spaces in your own place. Attics, crawl spaces, maybe behind that wall where there was a small leak years ago. Could there be compromised insulation quietly working against your comfort, your health, maybe even your wallet? And what might you do to find out?
Something to consider.
Definitely something to consider. That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for tuning in.